Hello and welcome to Hawkridge Systems CAD Livestream. Top 25 SOLIDWORKS tips and tricks you didn't know you had. My name is Taylor Hoff. I'll be co-hosting today along with Jesse Putnam.
That's right, Taylor. We are very excited to show you our favorite SOLIDWORKS tips to help you design better and faster. It's going to be a new tip about every 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, not too shabby, huh? And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat window. We have some people standing by to help us. Plus, we'll share some of the comments live throughout the hour. Before we get started, I'm just curious, now where's everyone joining from us today? Let's see here. Anyone type in chat, let us know where you're coming from, where you're watching us from today. Likely have people from all over the place. Don't see anyone dropped in there yet, but hey, we'll keep going here. We'll update you when we do see some chat in there.
Well, let's take a quick look at what's in store for today. So like we mentioned, we have 25 SOLIDWORKS tips and tricks. These are going to range from quick shortcuts to improve your workflows to direct editing techniques that you might not know that you had. And if you're worried you might miss something, don't. There's a PDF that you'll be able to download after this that's going to have an overview of every tip that we go over.
There we go. Chat was a little bit delayed there. We're getting people all over the place. Los Angeles, Columbus, Ohio, Olympia, Washington, Berkeley, California, my home state. Looks like we're getting people from all over the place. That's what I like to see. So once we wrap up those tips, we'll be giving away some great prizes at the end as well, including some SOLIDWORKS swag, as well as our grand prize, a 3D Connection Space Mouse Enterprise Kit.
Yep, I've seen the 3D Connection Space Mouse before. It is pretty cool. It's actually really cool. This thing is sweet.
Yeah, that thing is pretty fancy. So be sure to stick around until the end for that. Well, should we get started, Jesse?
I think so. Let's do it.
We're going to start off strong today. And like all of our tips and tricks that we talk about today, they're going to be applicable to all levels of SOLIDWORKS. No matter whether you have standard, professional, or premium, you'll be able to make use of these tips and tricks. Now, even if some of the tips aren't ones that you might use too often, when you do find your use case for them, they're going to be big time savers and can really take your SOLIDWORKS skills up a notch. So let's get started with our first tip of the day, using mouse gestures. And mouse gestures are a way to quickly grab commands using just some simple mouse movements. With just a flick of the mouse, we can grab commands quickly without ever having to go to the command manager or drop-down menus. Now we can see here on parts and assemblies, I use these standard mouse gestures for manipulating the viewport, the graphics area in our SOLIDWORKS window. I can quickly go to all of my standard orthographic views, top, front, back, right.
So are these gestures going to be the same for every environment?
No, they wouldn't be too helpful if they were the same for every single environment, would they? And thankfully, they aren't. Now we can customize these gestures per environment. That's one of the great parts about SOLIDWORKS in general, being able to make those customizations, make it fit your workflow. And so we have different gestures for parts, different gestures for assemblies, different gestures for drawings, and even different gestures for sketching. So you can really pick up the specific tools that we use most often, the ones that fit our workflow and our application best to really make the most of them, Now, from the customization menu, we can pick things like the number of mouse gestures. You see here on my mouse gesture wheel, I have 8, but we can use 12, 4, 2, or 3. Depending on how many you want there, you can add those commands, pick the number of commands in there. And when we want to add specific commands to that wheel, all we need to do is search for the specific command, click and drag, and drop it on over to the wheel we want here. You see I'm searching for the mate command here. I'm going to drop that onto my assembly mouse gesture wheel. Once it's in there, we can just hit OK. And from our mouse gesture wheel, you see the assembly tool right there. As soon as I gesture on over to it, it opens up the mate tool, and we are good to go. Now, like I said, customization is a big part of SOLIDWORKS. That's what makes part of it so powerful. We'll talk more about those customizations as we kind of go through our presentation today, and particularly when we get to our last tip of the day, Jesse and I's personal favorite, talk more about that customization.
As you were going through that, I noticed you were switching through your windows really quickly in all your open documents. How'd you do that?
Yep, yes I was. Typically, when we want to switch between open documents, we can use our regular mouse or regular window drop-down to select from those different open documents. But I find that kind of tedious. It's not really the best way to do things in my opinion. I like being quick and efficient in SOLIDWORKS, which is going to bring us to our next tip. Using Control and Tab to quickly switch between open documents. When we hold down Control on our keyboards and press Tab, it's going to show us all of the open documents with a preview of each. We can then continue to press Tab to kind of tab through those open documents, as I'm doing on the screen here now, and navigate to the exact one we need. Now, this is very useful when we're working on something like an assembly where we want to maybe modify a single component in that assembly. We can Control Tab on over to it, make our modifications, and then Control Tab back on over to our assembly to see how those changes affect things at the assembly level.
So what if I have a lot of documents open? Do I just have to hit the tab until I get to the one I want, or is there a better way to do that?
There's definitely a better way to do that. If we do have a lot of documents open, Control and Tab many times, again, tedious. Don't want to do that. So thankfully, when we press Control and Tab, when we're holding on the Control button, we can move our mouse cursor over to whichever document we want, make that click, and it'll switch over to that open document.
All right, sounds good.
All right, on to our next tip. It's not uncommon that we need to interrogate specific parts of our models or assemblies, requiring us to zoom in or out to get the level of detail we need so we can see the exact details of our models, right? But once we're done and we want to get back to the whole model again, get the full model back on screen, rolling the middle mouse wheel in and out can be cumbersome, especially if we're really zoomed in. Now, many people know about zoom to fit. It's a command that lives in our heads-up display menu. Right? Pretty useful command. Bring us back to our full graphics area showing our model. But many people don't know about the built-in shortcuts to access it, which brings us to our next tip, tip 3, using the F key to quickly pull our models back into full view. Now, this may seem like a pretty simple tip, but let me tell you, anytime that I can get away from moving my mouse across the screen to grab a command or simply reduce the number of clicks or keystrokes I'm making, I'm all for it. By using the F key, we can quickly zoom back out or in with a single keystroke.
So that command can also be done with just your mouse too, right?
It can. If you don't prefer using the keyboard to use that F key, you can also quickly double-click the middle mouse button on your mouse, which will do the same thing. It'll access that zoom to fit and bring our models back into view.
This is a great tip for those of us that are new to SOLIDWORKS or those that have been using SOLIDWORKS a long time. I use it all the time. Sometimes I get a little zoom happy. I've lost my model. I can just double-click my scroll wheel and there it is. I'm good to go.
I'm sure we've all been there.
Speaking of tips I use all the time, tip number 4 is how to show planes quickly in your part or assembly documents. Now looking at this model here, it still has a little bit of motion. And what I want to do is restrict it. I want to mate a face of this tire to my bottom of travel plane that I've already created. So I'll bring up my mate property manager. And then the first thing I'll do is once this manager is open, I need to select a face on that tire. And now I need to select that plane. I can easily show all my planes in a part or assembly by hitting the Q key, and then I can make that selection right there. Now what's really nice about this in an assembly is I can also move my cursor over any component in the graphics area, then hit that Q command. Now also see that component's planes as well while that's going on. So that's another added feature to that command.
That's a great command. I use Q all the time to show those planes, but Jesse, what if I need to grab a plane that doesn't exist yet in our model?
That's okay, and that brings us to our next tip, tip number 5, using the Control Drag tool. If my planes are open, I'll hold my Control key, then I can just drag my plane, immediately creating a new one, bringing up that property manager, and then I can fully define it. This doesn't just work for planes. Take this rod end, for instance, this little component that's missing. I can hold Control, drag that component in my assembly, and immediately create a new one, just like that. Then I can easily mate it in there, and we're good to go. So the Control creates new planes. It'll add duplicate components. Also in parts, I can use it on features in my design tree, like a fillet feature, drag that right onto model edge. Go ahead and give that a shot when you have some free time, but I use that tip a lot. But let's say that I have a specific selection I need to make, and I'm having a really hard time picking that in SOLIDWORKS. That brings us to tip number 6, the filter toolbar. Going back to this same mate, you can see I'm selecting a bunch of vertices, but I'm looking for a face. I'll hit F5 on my keyboard, bring up this filter selection toolbar. Here I can specify to select only edges, faces, a lot of other options. Once that is selected, I will only be able to click on whatever I selected, which in this case is a face. Now you can close this toolbar again by the same way you opened it, hitting F5. But the problem is, now I can't click on anything else because that selection filter hasn't been turned off. Not a big problem. I can turn that filter toolbar back on and turn it off manually by clicking that button there at the bottom left, or you can just hit F6 and that'll undo the selection filter, giving you freedom to click on anything you want within your document.
I love this tip, Jesse. I'm sure we've all been in that situation where we have a filter active, we're not able to click what we want, don't know what's going on. Definitely good to know how we can turn those off easily.
Yep, I've definitely made that mistake a couple times, closing that toolbar, and then I don't know why I can't click anything. But you have that nice cursor feedback, that'll give you a hint as to what's going on. So moving on to our next tip, tip number 7. Let's say you wanted to create this weldment part. The first thing you need to do is create this 3D sketch. Now, how's your 3D sketching, Taylor?
I'll say I am pretty good at 3D sketching. I've done a lot of tubular chassis design in my career, but
Well, I wish I could say the same. My 3D sketching probably has some room for improvement, but that model or that 3D sketch, I could actually model as a solid body really quickly. So I'm going to take advantage of that fact. First, I'm going to just create this model quickly. I've got it. Now I will open a new 3D sketch. With this 3D sketch open, I need to select all of my model edges. To make it a little easier, we can just change our display to wireframe. And then I'll use that selection filter toolbar to filter for just model edges. So I'll drag select all of my edges. At this point, I can hit the convert entities command. That'll convert all of those model edges right into sketch entities. And now I've created that 3D sketch. Now best practice here is going to be removing that solid body. We don't want any incorrect mass calculations down the road or anything like that. So I can just right click it and use the delete keep bodies command to remove that. But in the situation where I can model the sketch quicker than I'd be able to actually create it in that 3D sketching environment, that convert entities trick works really, really well.
yeah, it's definitely something I wish I knew when I was doing my tubular chassis design. Probably would have made things a lot easier had I known that was a possibility.
Well, now you know.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse.
Yeah. And that brings us to our next tip, dynamic mirror entities. Now let's say I wanted to create a little bit more sketch entities on this top of this 3D sketch. I'll just create a new plane. I'm going to start a sketch and I'm going to create a center line. Now I know everything I'm drawing is going to be symmetrical about this center line. So I'll select my dynamic mirror tool. I have that in my shortcut menu, but this lives under sketch tools as well. And once this is turned on, anything I create or any sketch entity I create on one side of this line is going to immediately be reflected on the other side of that line. So I'm essentially creating double the entities with half the clicks. Really good way to take advantage of symmetry in your sketches.
Yeah, this seems like a great tool when we have a part or design we know is going to be symmetric. Really saves a lot of time by essentially having the number of sketches entities we need to create.
Exactly, and that is the idea behind it, is just saving time where we can.
Absolutely. Our next tip, tip number 9, talking about making use of the split line tool. The split line tool allows us to break up existing faces on our models. This is useful when we want to select maybe a specific subset of geometry on our parts that may not be readily selectable given how our model was built up. For example, if we want to be able to just pick a specific part of a face on our model to apply changes to. This could be the case when we're setting up simulations. Maybe we want to apply a fixture or a load to just a subset of a face. Or maybe we're changing appearances. We just want a section of a face to have that change in appearance. Or if we need to modify local geometry with some direct editing tools. Now with the split line tool, we can create something like a sketch that we have here on screen. And we're going to grab that sketch, tell SOLIDWORKS which face we want to project it onto, and we can see now we have two distinct faces. It was once a single face. We have that nice subsection of geometry here. We have some other options in the split line tool. We can either do an intersection, that's where we take something like a plane or a face, and tell SOLIDWORKS which bodies we want to split up as that face or plane intersects those bodies. So you can see these two semi-vertical members in our weldment here, splitting it up with the intersection of the front plane, and now we have two distinct faces on each one of those members. Now, speaking of direct editing tools, SOLIDWORKS is best known for its parametric modeling capabilities. Most users don't know how much direct editing has improved over the years.
That is really true. Most users don't know about the direct editing tools that SOLIDWORKS has available to us all already.
Now, direct editing tools, as I mentioned, they have come a long way since SOLIDWORKS was first introduced. And that brings us to our next tip, tip 10, making use of probably my favorite direct editing tool, and that's going to be the delete face command. Like we said, most people are used to those parametric techniques, right? Creating revolves, extrudes, and cuts, things like that. But direct editing tools like delete face are used when you want to apply more of a what you see is what you get approach to creating our models. So let's pause on this model for just a moment here, Jesse. We have those two pieces of that extrude kind of protruding into the inside of our weldment, with those pieces going inside of the tubes here. What would you do in this situation to fix that?
Quickly thinking about it, maybe just start a sketch and roughly start chopping away and remove as much material as I can.
Yeah, that's right. A possibility might be creating a circular sketch, extrude cut, getting rid of that material. But that might be difficult here given the contours of that curved weldment, that curved tube. So this is exactly where the delete face command comes in handy. So with the delete face tool, we can grab that, and all we need to do is tell SOLIDWORKS which faces we'd like to have removed. Now, with this option, see here, we're going to click those faces on the inside of that extrude, grab all the ones on the inside on the top here. Again, do the same thing down on the bottom. And the method we'll be using here for the delete face command is going to be delete and patch. What that's going to do is SOLIDWORKS will delete all of those faces for us, but there'll be a gap left behind. But with the delete and patch option, it's going to patch that hole up, fix up our geometry by extending any adjacent faces to create a nice, clean feature on the inside. You see, no lines or anything, it just simply remove that geometry. Now we have other options within the delete face tool we can do, which is simple delete, which will just remove those faces. That'll typically turn a solid body into a surface body. Or we can also use the delete and fill option, which will create a brand new surface to patch up any holes created by deleted geometry. So either way, using the delete face command can get rid of that extraneous geometry with just a handful of clicks, whereas using something like a cut extrude would be much more challenging.
Yeah, that's a pretty sweet tip right there. I use delete face a fair amount. Really cool one. Speaking of cool tips, that brings us to the next one. Tip number 11, project curve. So I'm going to use this part as an example to explain it. If you take a look, all that this is really comprised of is a sweep that's made of a sketch profile and a 3D curve. So let's focus on the three-dimensional curve here. If I had to sketch this in a 3D sketching environment, I don't know if I could do it at all. If I could, it would probably take a while, but the benefit of the project curve is if you have a curve that has orthographic projections, what I mean is I can fully define this curve by just its front and right view. You can take advantage of that in the project curve command. You'll see underneath it, there's two sketches. I'll delete this command and show you how it was created again. So I've got my front sketch and my right sketch defining that. I'll then go to my curves dropdown and select the project curve tool. Here I'll just select both sketches. I get a really nice preview, and then I just accept it, and there we go. And now I've created that three-dimensional curve that I'm not sure if I would have been able to do otherwise.
Like I said, I'm pretty good at 3D sketching, Jesse, but I don't know if I'd be able to create that on the fly.
I'd be really impressed.
Some complex splines in there or something. That project curve definitely would fit the bill there.
And this is a great segue into the next tip, combine comment, tip number 12. Very similarly to the project curve, if you have some sort of model geometry that you can describe or define by its orthographic views, let's say in this example, a front view and a top view, I can use the combine comment command. So I'll quickly show you how this part was created. It looked pretty complicated, but all it is two sketches. I'll extrude that first sketch out, use just a mid-plane extrusion, 6 inches, and then accept it. And now for the second sketch on the top plane, I'll then do a through-all extrusion in both directions. But the trick here is to make sure that merge result option is cleared. I want 2 solid bodies in this part. I do not want them to be a single solid body. Now because of this, this is going to give us the combine comment option. I'll select both those solid bodies in my solid body folder. Click on the combine, and you'll see that we have add, subtract, or combine. Combine, I get a nice preview. I've created that geometry, and now I'll just accept it. So from here, you can go and make it as fancy as you want, add some fillets, things like that. How do you feel about that part? Do you think you'd be able to create it without that combine common command?
You know, it's something I could definitely model, but it would take far more features than it would just using this combine common. Definitely a powerful tool. Now, Jesse, we've been talking a lot about tips related to parts, but now it's time to focus on some assembly-specific ones. You know,
Good idea.
I deal with complex assemblies often, and you know, sometimes I struggle with managing all of the components and mates. Sometimes it can be very tedious, you know, especially when we have a lot of similar components or maybe many instances of a particular component where it seems like I'm essentially just, you know, adding the same mates over and over again. Thankfully, we can simplify that process with our next trick, tip 13, making use of mate references. Now we can kind of think of mate references like essentially predefined mates. On this miter saw model here, we see we had that motor with a little plug hole on top where something like this power cord would plug into. And because of the way this is modeled and the way those components interact with each other, you know, that's always going to plug in the same way each and every time. So we can set up some reference geometry with a mate reference to tell SOLIDWORKS how we want each of these components to mate. In this example, I have the power cord model here. I'm grabbing the faces that I want to have mated in our top level assembly, selecting what type of mate I'd like to use, in this case coincident for each one of those faces, as well as the alignment, which will be anti-aligned for each one of these. Now that we've defined this mate reference, we can go ahead and define that same thing for the counterpart. We're going to go over to the motor model here and define how we want that power cord to mate on this model. So again, we're going to come up to our reference geometry, grab our mate references. We're going to tell SOLIDWORKS which faces we'd like to select for that model. And it doesn't just have to be faces, it can be any geometry, just like a regular mate could. Select those faces, select the mate types, again to be coincident for each one here. So it's coincident with those matching faces on the power plug. And then select the alignment, again going to be anti-aligned for each one. Select that geometry in there, and we'll go ahead and hit OK to accept that. Now when we create these mate references, they actually live here at the part level. So you see we have a folder here full of our mate references containing what we just set up. So SOLIDWORKS now recognizes that. And because it lives with the part at the part level, that means if we ever use, let's say, a different type of power plug, it's going to plug into that motor. We can set up a new mate reference on the other power plug, and again, it's going to plug right into that motor like it should. So with those two mate references set up, I can just grab my power cable, and you see it just snaps into place there. SOLIDWORKS recognizes those references we set up. We don't have to add those mates manually. So something like this, a power cable, which will always plug in the same way, will just snap into place to see it added 3 coincident mates there for us automatically. Very quick and easy.
Wow, that seems really useful for something that you would use over and over, like a component that you use in a lot of assemblies. Why not use the mate references there?
Exactly, that's exactly what it's built for. You know, things like electrical connectors, ports, valves, maybe fluid fittings. That's kind of the perfect candidates for using mate references, things that'll be used many times in our assemblies the same way over and over again. After defining that mate reference, and like I said, it now lives with that part it's defined in, so when we add it to the assembly, it just snaps into place.
Yep, makes
Now,
sense.
Oftentimes, again, when working in complex assemblies, we need to access components that maybe we can't necessarily see because it's either inside or behind another component. So Jesse, in that situation, what you might do to try to find a hidden component?
I'd probably just fully expand my design tree and go through it one by one to try and find that component, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an option, but not one that I think I'd want to do. It sounds pretty tedious, right? So that brings us to our next tip, tip 14. Hiding components with the tab key. By hitting tab on our keyboards, whatever our cursor is floating over, SOLIDWORKS will instantly hide. So you can see here on this miter saw, I'm trying to get to a gear on the inside of the head of the saw, but it's hidden behind lots of components. And all I'm doing is hovering my cursor over the components I want to hide, and then hitting tab to very quickly hide those. And when we want to bring them back, we can just hover over those components where their location in 3D space is, hold down Shift and press tab to unhide them. A very nice tip or trick for very quickly hiding and showing components in an assembly. Now obviously we could go through the process of hiding and showing through our right-click menu, right-clicking on components and going to that hide, but using the tab key makes this process very simple and very quick. And you know, Honestly, my left hand is always by the left-hand side of my keyboard when I'm modeling. Tab there is right there, very easy to click and make use of.
You hit a lot of components pretty quickly there. What happened, or how would I unhide them? Do I have to kind of hope my cursor goes over where they were in the graphics area and then do Shift-Tab, or is there a better way to do that?
That can be a bit of a challenge, especially if we hit a lot of components. I went a little overzealous in hiding components there for that one.
Happens.
Yeah, it does. So thankfully, we don't manually have to select each one of those to unhide. SOLIDWORKS gives us a lot of options, a lot of different ways we can do to make selections. Which brings us to our next tip, tip 15, using the selection drop-down menu. The selection drop-down menu selects different items, like components in an assembly, using a range of different parameters. You can see lots of these different parameters here. So for example, all of those components that I hid here in the miter saw, I brought some back, but not all of them. I can tell SOLIDWORKS to just select the hidden components in our assembly. SOLIDWORKS automatically picks up every component that's hidden, and now with a single right click on one of those components, I can hit show, and it brings all of those back. Much easier than either going through our tree, or like you mentioned, Jesse, having to go Shift-Tab, trying to find where those components exist in 3D space. We have other options too for making selections. So for example, if we want to select just toolbox parts, maybe we want to break out all of our hardware into a separate assembly, so we can have a separate bill of materials just for fasteners. We can do that too, grab all those very quickly. SOLIDWORKS even has an advanced select option. With the advanced select option, we get a little dialog that pops up here that allows us to combine that criteria. So we can pick very specific parameters we want to grab our items by. See, we can combine them here with either and or statements. In this case, I'm going to try to grab all fasteners that are not suppressed. And so I specify that here, I hit apply, and SOLIDWORKS again automatically picks those up. No hunting in the tree, no trying to figure out where my components are, just a few clicks of our mouse and we can grab all those components very easily.
That looks like a really useful tool, but I am noticing that design tree is looking pretty large in that assembly. That brings us to our next tip. Tip number 16, folders. Using folders to organize your part or assembly design trees. Now I'm going to focus on the support handle sub-assembly on this assembly here. Notice it has all these loose toolbox components living in there. That's making my design tree huge. We don't need that. I'm going to select all those components. Actually, I should have used the selection tool that Taylor just talked about.
Yeah,
but here I'm just using a shift to select them all, but that's okay. With all these components selected, I'll click Add to New Folder. And now I can just organize all of them in this design tree. They don't need to be there, taking up all that space. If I ever need to access them, I can access that folder. So really useful tool for organizing your design trees, making them much shorter and easier to understand, especially if you're collaborating on your assembly models.
I use folders all the time. I find not many SOLIDWORKS users use them, but once I discovered being able to organize things in our tree with folders, I use them in parts, I use them in assemblies. It makes things a lot easier when we want to organize those things in our tree.
Yep, super helpful.
Now, folders are an awesome tool for organization. Like I said, I use them all the time. But what if I want to go a step further? What if I want to organize things into sub-assemblies? Now, Jesse, what do you think about that?
Seems like that'd be pretty hard, right? You mean so something that's already in an assembly, you want to reorganize that structure? I don't know, that seems like a lot of work.
At first glance it might. But thankfully, we can actually modify our assembly structure straight from the top level assembly with our next tip, tip 17, being able to create and dissolve sub-assemblies from within our top level assembly. For example, we have these two halves of this power cord here, the one half that plugs into the wall and the one half that plugs into the motor. Right now, they're at the top level assembly. It makes sense to me to put these as a sub-assembly. So I can select both, right-click, and select Create New Assembly. And right off the bat, it combines those two, and we have a brand new sub-assembly in our tree with those two components. I can select it here, and we see our power cable assembly and those two components in it instantly. No having to create a new document, no exiting the top level assembly and then creating a new document. It's all done right here from the tree. We can also dissolve existing sub-assemblies. So for example, we have this little clamp on the end of our power cable. Let's say I don't want the fasteners in that assembly, I just want to break this out, put those at the top level. I can right-click that sub-assembly and click Dissolve Sub-Assembly, and now they all exist at the top level. We can also modify sub-assemblies as well. Let's say I want those clamps in that power cable assembly. All it takes is a simple click and drag. I'm going to click and drag each one up from that top level, drop them into our new sub-assembly we just created, And now we have a total of 4 components in that subassembly, all from without leaving this top level assembly. Now we want to go ahead and give this a name, power cable assembly, right? Never like those ambiguous SM1, SM2. That was
don't
never
like
a good
that.
idea. Nope. Now it's important to note that when we do create an assembly like this, it creates a virtual subassembly, which exists in our top level assembly, but much like any other virtual part or virtual assembly, we can save it out to its own file and edit it in its own window here as well. Definitely a great tool for making use of the components that already exist in an assembly when we want to go one step further with that organization.
Yeah, I'm really loving this assembly organization tips. What's next on the docket for our assembly tips?
Well, let's see here. Our next tip, as we all know, moving components around in our assembly, clicking and dragging. We've all done it, right? Very easy to click and drag components and move them. But what if we need more advanced functionality? That's going to bring us to a tip 18 with our move command.
So why would I need a special command? The regular click and drag seems to work so well. What's the difference using the move command?
Well, if we want to go one step further than just a simple click and drag, we can use the move command to either translate or rotate our components. For example, we can specify numeric values, a delta. In this case, I'm specifying a 15-degree change in the rotation of that head of our miter saw. I'm going to go back with a negative 15 degrees. I can move it with those numeric values to get the exact change I want in either the rotation or translation of our components. We can also specify by absolute XYZ too if we know the exact position we want. And then we have advanced features like this collision detection. Collision detection is going to allow us to move our components through their dynamic sweep, their movement in our assembly, and SOLIDWORKS will tell us where those components are colliding. And as you know, Jesse, by default, SOLIDWORKS does not calculate those collisions, but when we need to have that information, when we need to see when our components are interfering through motion, that collision detection is going to be a great tool for us. We can even detect dynamic clearance. So let's say we want to find out the clearance between this piece of lumber and the saw blade as it's kind of going through its range of motion here. We turn on dynamic clearance, tell SOLIDWORKS which components we want to measure in between, and then we get that dynamic value showing up on screen, showing us the exact value for that clearance as we move through our range of motion of our miter saw. So click and drag is great. I still use it all the time, but when we do need to kind of step up that functionality, the move tool, great command.
I think you missed something in there.
Yes, I did, Jesse. I was just checking to make sure you were paying attention.
Oh, I am paying attention. And that brings us to our next tip, number 19, smart mates with the Alt key. Now, inside this move command, you'll see that icon that has a paper clip and a lightning bolt on it. This is the smart mates tool. And what this does is allow us to quickly make simple mates like concentric and coincidence mates and circumnavigate that mate property manager. Now, you don't have to be in the move command to realize these benefits. If I hold the Alt key and then click on a selection like an edge, vertex, or face of a part component, it turns translucent. I get that paper clip icon on my mouse letting me know the Smart Mates tool has been initiated. Then I can quickly drag it right into place. What's really nice about this is you get really cool smart mating features. This is called the pin and hole feature. And I just applied both a concentric and coincident mate at the same time without even bringing up that mate property manager.
You know, typically I'll use the regular mate command to grab my mates, but in situations like that where we can add 2 mates at once, the pin and hole, that's something I use all the time.
It really speeds up our assemblies, and I think that's a great segue into our next item. I want to speed up some drawings. How can I do that?
So, drawings, prints, we all need them when we're documenting our designs, right? Now, Jesse, how many times have you used the Smart Dimension tool to detail your prints, only to come to the realization that, hey, I'm repeating these dimensions that I used to build our model in the first place?
All the time. It's feel like I'm just doing double the work. I created these dimensions in the part. Why do I have to recreate them in the drawing?
Yeah, we just saw that on screen, all those dimensions that exist in that model. So I ask myself that question all the time, or at least I used to. Why am I doing this duplicate work? Well, thankfully, SOLIDWORKS has a tool called model items, with our next tip, making use of model items to bring in dimensions that already exist in our part model. By using the model items tool, we can select the type of dimensions we want to bring in. One's marked for dimension, or marked for drawing, hole callouts, hole positions, annotations, things like that. And with a click of our model, it brings all of those in. We can even left click on each of those to move them around, or right click them to omit them when we're adding them to the tool. Now here, we're going to organize our dimensions, but can you imagine how much more time that would have taken if we'd used the regular Smart Dimension tool?
Not off the top of my head, but it definitely would have taken longer.
Yeah. And once we use the model items tool to bring in all of our model items, right, they are now attached to the parent view, which they come in on. I can reorganize these and get the drawing looking exactly how I want it.
Now you just did something really interesting there. I saw you move that view. Generally when I move views, I need to zoom in and find some sort of area of open space because I don't want to click on a dimension, an annotation, some sort of model edge to move the view. So it's been kind of difficult for me to figure out how to easily move that without finding that open space for my cursor.
You know, I've definitely run into that issue before too. You know, accidentally grabbing a dimension or a model edge when I just want to move the view around. So typically when we want to move a view, we have to move our cursor over the border of a view. See it highlight, move our cursor over, and then click and drag. Finding that border can be difficult. Okay, well, not really difficult, but more tedious than I'd like it to be. Thankfully, our next tip will make that process much easier. Tip 21, making use of the Alt key to move our drawing views. And like we said, trying to find the right spot, hovering over that border to move our views, don't like it, too much work for me. I like things easy. By holding down the Alt key, we can click anywhere in a drawing view to move it. Doesn't matter if we're hovering over a dimension, a model edge, or a face, we can hold down Alt, click and drag, a very quick way to move those views. Now, it's definitely a smaller trick, just holding on the Alt key to move our drawing views, but of course we like nice organized drawings. And, this is definitely a tip that I found I cannot live without. It makes our lives much easier when we want to have nice clean prints.
That's a really nice tip. Going on to our next tip, tip number 22, settings for drawing leaders. So I'm going to focus on this front view that you just added the model items and dimensions to. I like it. I don't love it. I think it's missing something. I don't like how all my dimension and extension lines are all intersecting each other. Not a big deal though. I'm just going to select all my dimensions, go to my leaders tab, and then find the break lines option in that property manager. What this is going to do is give us the ability to create breaks between those dimension and extension lines, just like you're seeing here on the screen. Now that value does live in the system options, in your document properties on how big of a gap you want. Also in this document properties, you'll see an option called break only around dimension arrows. Make sure that option is cleared. Otherwise, that break lines checkbox in the property manager might not do anything. If it does, it's only going to break them around those dimension arrows, so you're not going to really see those benefits. So something to be aware of when you're using that.
Yeah, clean drawings. That's kind of key when documenting our parts, right? Anytime we have a messy drawing, no one likes looking at it. I know more than a few machinists that would be very upset if I gave them a dirty drawing with lots of crossing leaders.
I do not want to upset my machinists.
I do not either.
Speaking of things that upset machinists, we're going to talk about editing bill of material cells. And this is tip number 23. So we've always had the ability to edit our cells in our bill of materials. Here I'm looking at my description custom property, and we can keep the link and I can change this custom property. I'm just going to add A1 to the end of this shaft's description value, and I kept the values linked. So now I'll go up and open the part, and I'll see that inside that part document, if I bring up its custom properties, that value has transferred over, so that's working correctly. This isn't new, nothing special. We've all been able to do this before. We've also been able to break the link and input a manual value here. So let me pause. Taylor, have you ever had any issues with BOM cells being overridden?
Yeah, I've had other people go into my drawings, modify bill of material cells, and before 2023, you would have never known they were changed. This can cause a lot of issues down the line with either production or assembly or machining. Big hassle.
That's right, before 2023. And now in 2023, a great update. Notice what happens is I changed this cell but broke the link. That color has changed, letting me know, or whoever's looking at this drawing know, that those values have been overridden. If I look at that part's custom properties, I can see that value hasn't transferred over. We're reading a manual input here. I'm not actually looking at it. And if I click on the top left icon of my bill of materials, I can see which cells have those custom values and which ones do not. You can right-click Restore All the Original Values, or right-click Individual Cells and Restore Original Values. And this color is defined in our System Options. So I'll go up to my System Options, I'll go to Colors, and then I can find how I can change my color that's going to let me know that those cells have been overridden in my bill of materials. So this is a really nice addition, new to 2023. We don't have to worry about incorrect or manually updated bill of materials anymore.
Just that visibility on change cells in our bill of materials. Small change, but huge at the same time. Tons of benefit.
Can definitely save some trouble down the line.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Next tip I'm going to talk about, tip number 24, force rebuild. So it's generally best practice to throw a rebuild on after you make some sort of change in your model. Here I'm going to change this dimension from 2.5 to 2.75. Now in this assembly, it's been mirrored, and I want to check that that dimension has been changed on the mirrored component as well. I'm going to click on your regular rebuild or rebuild all configurations. Doesn't matter, it's either Control B or Control Shift B, but I'll use my regular rebuild command. And I'm going to bring up my measure tool and just confirm that that dimension's been changed. So here I can see my normal distance, 2.75, looks good. I'll look at the mirrored component, click on those two faces to get that dimension, and I'll see my normal distance is still 2.5. So it didn't fully rebuild for me. I'll go ahead and click rebuild again, and now if I measure that, it will reflect the actual value. But I'm probably not the only person that has done a rebuild and afterward seen results that are not what I was expecting. And the force rebuild command is a really good thing to do, or a good next step to do. Force rebuild is going to rebuild every top level component in an assembly as well as its assembly features. In a part document, it's going to rebuild every feature in the feature manager design tree. In a drawing, it's going to rebuild any views that's created with sketch geometry. So for instance, a detail view will rebuild because a sketch circle was used to create it, as well as lines for section views. It'll rebuild things in the sheet format like the border as well. So force rebuild is going to rebuild a lot more items than your typical rebuild, which only rebuilds items that have that icon in front of them and their children. So a great step if your rebuild isn't quite doing what you expected, do a Control Q on your keyboard. That's the only way to access that command as well.
Yeah, Control Q, one I use all the time. Again, my left hand's always on the left side of the keyboard. Control Q right there. Force rebuild. Just make sure all your
Control Q,
designs,
just like that.
There we go.
Yep.
Make sure everything's up to date and we're good to go.
And this brings up our last tip, our favorite tip. This is tip number 25, the S key shortcut bar.
You know, I actually saw someone mention this one in chat earlier.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. The S key brings up an environment-dependent shortcut menu, and it's one that both Jesse and I probably could not live without at this point.
Yeah, that's right. And I like how you mentioned it, Taylor. It's fully customizable, meaning we can set it up to house commands that we use the most. We can really tailor it to fit our own specific applications and workflows, just like the mouse gesture tip that you talked about at the beginning of the hour.
Yeah, like you said, Jesse, the S key shortcut menu is fully customizable. It brings up those commands right at our mouse cursor, so we can grab our commands with fewer clicks and also while barely moving our mouse. Now, that's one of the great things about SOLIDWORKS, the ability to customize the SOLIDWORKS environment to fit how we like to work best. Our specific workflows, our specific applications, we can really customize that, and the S key really highlights that. Another highlight of the S key shortcut menu is the search bar that was added in the 2022 release of SOLIDWORKS.
This is a big one for me, and I think it'd be an understatement for me to say that it's changed my life. Having that search bar there so I can type in and find any command at my fingertips is super helpful. And what's another great added addition to it is if I want to add that command to my shortcuts in that S key, I can just hit that plus icon, and then it'll always be right there for me.
And definitely very useful adding them on the fly. And part of what makes the S key shortcut menu so powerful is that it's customizable per environment, just like our mouse gestures. That means that we can set up commands for our own specific workflows for each environment, parts, assemblies, drawings, and sketches. We can have a specific set of commands for each, grab those commands that we use most commonly that best fit our workflows. It really helps speed things up. Nowadays, I rarely grab commands from the command manager anymore.
And why would you now that they're right at your fingertips?
Exactly. Now, this is why the S key shortcut bar is our ultimate tip. It's a huge time saver. And at first glance, it might not seem like a lot, just having those commands at your cursor. But I promise you that adding this to your workflow make it much more efficient and will save tons of time and will likely be your new best friend when working in SOLIDWORKS.
You know, that's right. I know both you and I use the S key every single time we use SOLIDWORKS. I highly recommend it to anyone and everyone to figure out how to get this into your workflow.
I agree 100%, Jesse.
All right, well, there's a lot of great tips there, Taylor.
I actually saw a chat message. Someone was wondering how many times we said tip during this presentation.
Probably more than 25.
Probably a lot. And yeah, there were tons of great tips in there, Jesse.
Well, we hope you discovered some new way or a couple new ways to improve your workflow and design better and faster parts. As always, Hawkridge is here to set you up for success. So reach out to our team and see how we can help you even more. But it's about that time.
Prize time?
Prize time. Let's do it. So up first, we're going to give away 3 SOLIDWORKS swag bags. These include an awesome tote bag, portable power bank, and a leather-bound notebook. So I'm just going to start with our first winner here. Congratulations to Rajiv Kondagari. Congratulations, Rajiv. I have this bag, so I'm not giving you something that I wouldn't recommend myself. I love it.
I have one as well, Jesse, and I use it all the time. So congratulations, Rajiv. All right, our next winner that's getting their SOLIDWORKS swag bag is Marcus Willie. Congratulations, Marcus.
Way to go, Marcus. And our last winner of the SOLIDWORKS swag bag, Lucas Brown. Congratulations, Lucas.
Congratulations, guys. Enjoy those prizes. Well, that takes care of our swag bags, Jesse. Now let's talk grand prize. That's right, the 3D Connection Space Mouse Enterprise Kit. You know, this kit is awesome. It's great tools to have at your fingertips when working in SOLIDWORKS. It's going to replace a lot of other hardware. I find most of the times you don't even need a keyboard when you have this kit.
Yeah, this thing is sweet. I mean, not only does it have that really cool joystick to help you move around in your part and assembly environments, it has all those shortcut keys you can program to direct SOLIDWORKS functions. So you can really speed things up with a mouse like this.
Yeah, smooth movement around your assemblies and using those commands on the fly. Awesome. All right, so let's see who our lucky winner is for our 3D Connection Space Mouse Enterprise Kit. Congratulations, Marty Onimus. Grand prize winner right there. I'm jealous. I don't know about you.
I'm pretty jealous myself. Way to go, Marty.
Yeah, congratulations. And that's not all. 100 other of you will also be receiving a free training voucher, which includes a learning path and 2 credits to take a SOLIDWORKS certification. So you can put these new tips and tricks to use to work for you. Look out in your email inboxes to see if you were one of the lucky winners.
All right, well, we want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to come watch this. I hope you have something that you can take back with you to improve your design. Don't forget to download your own copy of the PDF after this. It's just going to give you a brief overview of everything we went over. So thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.